Good morning, everyone. This is Saturday morning. This is a day that weddings take place a lot. A lot of weddings take place on Saturdays. My name is Dr. Kelsey Graham. I have literally been involved in thousands of weddings in my life. I have officiated thousands of weddings. I've helped to offer DJ services, photography, video, and I cannot tell you in those thousands how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and probably into the thousands of weddings I've helped plan and direct. Inadvertently, later in my life, I have indeed learned a lot about weddings and marriage. I'm also a facilitator of a couples counseling program called SIMBAS, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. I deal with a lot of couples, and then I belong to a lot of groups on Facebook that deal with weddings and planning weddings, wedding vendors, and on and on and on it goes. I'm not presenting this to take away from the joy of your wedding day. I'm presenting some hardcore things for you to know and think about to ease the stress of your going into your wedding day, to help you to balance your thinking and understanding of weddings and the place of weddings in regards to a marriage. And I think this is very important because I see so many make such a deal out of this ritual we perform, which can be fun. It can be wonderful. But I don't understand why you're put in a situation to be so stressed out over what should be a celebration. And if it's any indication of how your marriage is going to be, I would advise most of you, wait, don't get married. If you're going through this just for a one day, few hours of activity that are not required to make a marriage, what are you going to do when something really important, life-threatening, something comes up in your life? The wedding is not the most important day of your life. The marriage should be a very important part of your life, but the wedding does not create the marriage. This is where people have got everything skewed here. A wedding is a celebration of what's already taken place in the heart. Unfortunately, our culture and our society has convinced people that somehow this ritual is what creates a marriage. It's not. A marriage takes place here. Most people cannot even identify exactly when that marriage happened. A lot of times it just sneaks up on you. You meet somebody, you connect with somebody, you grow into somebody or with somebody. And the next thing you know, you're inseparable. You think about this person all the time. That's the creation of a marriage. And then that creation of a marriage continues all the way through, all the way to your death. Till death do we part. You're working on this marriage all your life. You're growing together. You're maturing together. You're evolving together. A marriage is a lifetime experience. A wedding, and here's another point. The actual wedding is like 20, 30 minutes tops, unless you're Hindu or Catholic. Average weddings, roughly 20 minutes. And I hear you brides tell me, I'm planning my wedding. It's like, no, you're not. You're planning a wedding day that includes hours of a reception. What in the Christian Bible they call a wedding feast. The wedding is that shortest part of your day. You spend more time taking pictures during that day than you do actually having the wedding. Because the wedding reception is not the wedding. And I've seen this evolve, and it's like, let's get to thinking straight. I want to make this a stress-free event. I want to make this a celebratory event. I want to balance it out. What's important, what's not important. So for my Christian viewers that are concerned about having a Christian or a Christian wedding or religious wedding, so forth, I want to draw your attention to the fact that in those 66 books of the Protestant Bible, there are no weddings. At no time in the history of the Bible did any priest or government official get involved in a marriage. It did not happen. Even when the story of Jesus came along, Jesus went to a wedding feast, what today we'd call a reception. It doesn't speak of the actual wedding itself. There were no vows given. There were no I do's. There was no giving of the bride. None of those things existed in Bible times. Read the book. Read the book. It's pretty sadly, and I think it's pretty pathetic as well, that we go into this mode of being, we're indoctrinated with this thought that we've got to have a license from the government to create a marriage. It's not legitimate unless you get that piece of paper. That piece of paper is a fairly new thing. It's certainly nothing that was, again, Bible-based. And I'm not against that piece of paper. But again, create balance. When you're going and you're getting in all this hype of this big day, oh, you've got to have pictures. You've got to have this dress. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. You don't. My mother and father, like a lot of your mother and fathers, simply went to the courthouse, stood before a probate judge, got that piece of paper. They didn't spend $100 on their wedding. I've married couples in their soccer clothes with their kids coming from a soccer game. I've married a couple. Say I married a couple, which is a misnomer itself because I married nobody. I said some words and I signed a government document making their marriage legal. I didn't create the marriage. They created the marriage. I didn't marry them. They married each other. I officiated over a ceremony, which is a ritual we go through, and I made it legal with the state. In Alabama, that's changed. I still make it official and legal with the state, not by the words I use, not by any prayers I give or any quotes I use, not by them exchanging any vows publicly. In Alabama now, I do it by notarizing their signatures on a government document. And all this is done with probate. It's all filed through probate because ultimately it's a three-way contract between you, your partner, and the government. Because if something happens to either one of you, if you get divorced, if you have a dispute, if one of you dies, you're going to go to that court, to that probate where you filed that paper, and you're going to petition that court to decide for you who gets the kids, who gets the house, who gets the car. That's what the paper's for. And as they say, for record keeping, because up into the 20th century, if you go back to grandma's old Bible, the family Bible, if you have one, you'll notice they kept the records in the Bible. Why? Because the government didn't keep good records. People didn't look at the government for those responsibilities. And it wasn't until the 1920s that it became pretty much a standard across the nation. So know more about the history of what you're doing. Balance your thinking with this. You're only making number one, that 20 minutes we're standing there. That 20 minutes we're standing there, you're in this expensive dress, he's dressed up, they got people standing on the right, people standing on the left, it's called a bridal party. You're simply making a public declaration of what's taking place right here. You're standing in front of your peers, your family, your loved ones, your closest friends, your allies in life, and you're saying, I have chosen to spend the rest of my life with this person. And these people pretty much already know it, right? They've seen it evolve. They know you. They've witnessed it already. But you want to make it have a feel of making it official. And you want to make it legal with the government. Why? Because of insurance, because of name changes, because of those kind of things. So the reality of weddings is they have nothing to do with creating a marriage. Most couples we deal with now have already created the marriage and been living together, and some have already had kids together. As proof in the pudding, you didn't need that piece of paper. There's a famous actor and actress who's been together for decades and never got the piece of paper. And they have a better marriage than a lot of people that got the piece of paper and had this ritual. This couple's been together for decades. Never had this wedding. Never did that. It's got a great marriage. My mother and father went to the courthouse. No witnesses. No family there. They didn't even have any pictures. So when you boil this down, and this is what you, the bride, your mother, your aunt, all these people that want to get involved in your life in this public declaration of your love for each other, got to understand that what you're doing on this wedding day is not creating a marriage. That happens again in the heart. And most of us have no control over when and where and how it happens. It happens. It's a powerful thing. Love is that way. We spend a lot of our time in our society trying to define love, trying to find the words to express love. We fail horribly because love is proven over a lifetime. Love is not proven over 20 minutes, 30 minutes standing in front of a group of people saying some words. That doesn't prove anything. And I'm not saying this again to take away from your joy of having this wedding. But I want to emphasize again, the wedding is that small segment of time during that day that roughly on an average lasts for 20 minutes. That's the wedding. The rest of it is a wedding that the Bible calls a wedding feast. What we commonly call a wedding reception. That's not your wedding. That wedding is that small 20-minute window where you stood up in front of all your guests. You heard words of love and passion and some brief counsel from some person that stood in front of you and spoke these words, and maybe a prayer, and you repeated some vows to each other, or maybe wrote your own vows, and you exchanged rings. And you had somebody stand there and saying, by the powers vested in me by God in the state of Alabama, I pronounce you husband and wife. Which is crazy because I cannot make you man and wife. I cannot make you married. That happens here. No man, no government can create this relationship. That is you that do that. Don't give your power of love over to any institution, whether it be a religious institution or whether it be a government institution. It happens here. Go back and read the classics of some man and woman that fell in love, and the love was not approved by the king or by this one or that one, and they went through pain because they wanted to be together, but it wasn't sanctioned by their culture, by their government, or by their religion. Balance out what we're doing on this wedding day. Don't you find it strange that for most women, really, for the average woman out there, the most expensive dress she'll ever own in her life is a dress she'll only wear one day? Isn't that strange? See, in the big picture of these celebrations of weddings, up to a certain point, The girl would just go to her closet and pick out the nicest dress she had. It wasn't white. Black was a common color for dresses. It wasn't considered gothic. They just said, oh, there's a nice dress. That's my favorite dress. So they didn't go shopping for a wedding dress, but see, they've made an industry out of this, and they've convinced you that the only way your marriage can be official is you have this expensive situation going on. You stand up in front of all these people and you stress yourself out, sometimes for months, weeks, days. I see it all the time. I see these people, oh, my wedding's coming up. What should I do? Any advice? It's like, balance it out. That way you can enjoy the day. There's no requirement for a wedding gown that you're going to wear one time. I'm not saying you don't want to get dressed up, but hey, there's people that's gotten married in the nude, naked. It may not be your thing, but they're just as married as you're going to be, spending those thousands of dollars on everything you do. Their marriage may be stronger than yours, and they didn't go through all that. They didn't spend $4,000 for pictures. They didn't spend $1,200 for a dress. They didn't have a cake and all the frills. You've got to understand those things are fine. I don't want to take away from your pleasure and enjoyment of any of that, but what I want to do is to balance it out, because it's not necessary. All those things are luxury. They have nothing to do with creating a marriage. By the time you stand at the altar, as they say, you've already created a marriage. In today's society, by the time you reach that point, you've already lived together. You didn't wait to have sex. Did you wait to have sex? Did you? Did you wait to have sex? You haven't had sex, right? You haven't fondled each other's genitalia, right? They say the white dress symbolizes purity. Are you a virgin? Are you pure? Really? It's that simple. The moments that go into creating your marriage had nothing to do with that day that you're calling a wedding. And that day you call a wedding itself only encompasses roughly a 20-minute period of time when you're actually having a wedding ceremony. The rest of it is a reception. Again, what the Bible called a wedding feast. Jesus never officiated a wedding. Nobody in the Bible officiated a wedding. No government official and no religious official. These are modern concepts. So take a breath. Take a breath. Your wedding day coming up, take a breath. Relax. And realize you're already married. It's already happened. You're going through a ritual that our culture expects, let's say. And you're making a public declaration of what already is. You're not creating anything on this wedding day. George Bernard Shaw described marriage as an institution that brings together two people under the influence of the most violent, most insane, most elusive, and most transient of passions. They are required to swear that they'll remain in that excited, abnormal, and exhausting condition continuously until death do them part. Shaw's comment was amusing when he wrote it at the beginning of the 20th century. It still makes us smile today, because it pokes fun at the unrealistic expectations that spring from a clearly held cultural ideal that marriage should be based on intense, profound love, and a couple should maintain their ardor until death do them part. But for thousands of years, the joke would have fallen flat. For most of history, it was inconceivable that people would choose their mates based on something as fragile and as irrational as love, and then focus all of their sexual, intimate, and altruistic desires on that resulting marriage. In fact, most historians, sociologists, and anthropologists used to think romantic love was a recent Western invention. However, this is not true. People have always fallen in love, and throughout the ages, many couples have loved each other deeply. But only rarely in history has love been the main reason for getting married. When someone did advocate such a strange belief, it was no laughing matter. Instead, it was considered a serious threat to social order. In some cultures and times, true love was thought to be incompatible with marriage. Plato believed love was a wonderful emotion that led man to behave honorably. But the Greek philosopher was referring not to the love of a woman, such as the meaner men feel, but to the love of one man for another. Other societies considered it good to love if love developed after marriage, and thought love should be factored in along with the more serious considerations involved in choosing a mate. But even when past societies did welcome or encourage married love, they kept it on a short leash. Couples were not to put their feelings for each other above more important commitments, such as their ties to their parents, siblings, cousins, neighbors. Oh, God. In ancient India, falling in love before marriage was disruptive, almost antisocial act. The Greeks thought lovesickness was a type of insanity, a view that was adopted by medieval commentators in Europe. In the Middle Ages, the French defined love as a derangement of the mind that could be cured by sexual intercourse, either with a loved one or with a different partner. This cure assumed, Oscar Wilde once put it, that the quickest way to conquer yearning and temptation was to yield immediately and move on to more important matters. In China, excessive love between a husband and wife was a threat to the solidarity of the extended family. Parents could force a son to divorce his wife if her behavior or work habits did not please them, whether or not he loved her. They could also require him to take a concubine if his wife did not produce a son. Sounds biblical, right? If a son's romantic attachment to his wife rivaled his parents' claims on the couple's time and labor, the parents might even send her back to her family. In the Chinese language, the word for love did not traditionally apply to the feelings between the husband and the wife. It was used to describe an illicit, socially disapproved relationship. In the 1920s, a group of intellectuals invented a new word for love between spouses because they thought such a radical idea required its own special label. In Europe, during the 20th century, 12th and 13th centuries, adultery became idealized as the highest form of love among the aristocrats. According to the Countess of Champagne, it was impossible for true love to exert its powers between two people who are married to each other. In 20th century France, Adrius Capellanus, chaplain to Countess Marie of Troyes, wrote a treatise on the principles of courtly love. The first rule was that marriage is no real excuse for not loving, but he meant loving someone outside the marriage. As late as the 18th century, the French essayist Montaigne wrote that any man who was in love with his wife was a man so dull that no one else could love him. Courtly love probably loomed larger in literature than in real life. But for centuries, noblemen and kings fell in love with courtesans. rather than their wives. They married for political reasons. Queens and noble women had to be more discreet than their husbands, but they too looked beyond marriage for love and intimacy. And you do read that in classic literature, don't you? This sharp distinction between love and marriage was common among the lower and middle classes as well. Many of the songs and stories popular among peasants in medieval Europe mocked married love. The most famous love affair in the Middle Ages was that of Peter Abelard, a well-known theologian in France, and Heloise, the brilliant niece of a fellow churchman at Notre Dame. The two eloped without marrying, and she bore him a child. To save his career, but still passate Heloise's furious uncle, Abelard proposed in her love secret. This would mean that Heloise would not be living in sin, while Abelard still pursued his church ambition. But Heloise resisted the idea, arguing that marriage would not only harm his career, but also undermine their love. Even in societies that esteemed married love, couples were expected to keep it under strict control. Public displays of affection between husband and wife were considered unseemly. A Roman was expelled from the Senate because he had kissed his wife in front of his own daughter. Plutarch conceded that the punishment was somewhat extreme, but pointed out that everyone knew it was disgraceful to kiss one's wife in front of others. Some Greek and Roman philosophers even said that a man who loved his wife with excessive ardor was an adulterer. Many centuries later, Catholic and Protestant theologians argued that husbands and wives who loved each other too much were committing the sin of idolatry. Theologians chided wives who used endearing nicknames for their husbands because such familiarity on a wife's part undermined her husband's authority and the awe that the wife would feel for him. Although medieval Muslim thinkers were more approving of sexual passion between husband and wife than were Christian theologians, they also insisted that too much intimacy between husband and wife weakened a believer's devotion to God. And like their European counterparts, secular writers in the Islamic world believed that love thrived best outside of marriage. Many cultures still frown on placing love at the center of their marriage. In Africa and Fulbe, people of northern Cameroon do not see love as a legitimate emotion, especially within marriage. One observer reports that in conversations with their neighbors, Fulbe women vehemently deny emotional attachment to their husband. To many peasant and working class communities, too much love between husband and wife is seen as disrupted because it encourages the couple to withdraw from the wider web of dependence that makes society work. As a result, men and women often relate to each other in public, even after marriage, through the conventions of a war between the sexes, disguising their fondness they may really feel. They describe their marital behavior, no matter how exemplary it may be, in terms of convenience, compulsion, or self-interest, rather than love or sentiment. In Cockney rhyming slang, the term for wife is trouble and strife. Love has often been a desirable outcome of marriage, but not as a good reason for getting married in the first place. The Hindu tradition that celebrates love and sexuality in marriage, but love and sexual attraction are not considered valid reasons for marriage. First we'll marry, then we'll fall in love is the formula. As recently as 1975, a survey of college students in the Indian state of Karnataka found that only 18% strongly approved of marriages made based on love, while 32% completely disapproved. Similarly, in early modern Europe, most people believe that love developed after marriage. Moralists of the 16th and 17th centuries argued that if a husband and wife each other had a good character, they'd probably come to love each other. but they insisted that youths be guided by their families in choosing spouses who were worth learning to love. It was up to parents and other relatives to make sure that the woman had a dowry or the man had a good yearly income. Such capital, it was thought, would certainly help love flower. I don't believe that people of the past had more control over their hearts than we do today, or that they were incapable of deep love, so that so many individuals now hope to achieve in marriage. But love in marriage was a bonus, not a necessity. The great Roman statesman Cicero exchanged many loving letters with his wife Terentia during their 30-year marriage. But that did not stop him from divorcing her when she was no longer able to support him in the style to which he had become accustomed. Sometimes people did not have to make such hard decisions in 17th century America. Anne Bradstreet was the favorite child of an indulgent father who gave her the kind of education usually reserved for elite boys. He later arranged her marriage to a cherished childhood friend who eventually became the governor of Massachusetts. Combining love, beauty, material security, and marriage was not the strain for her that it was for many men and women of that era. Anne wrote love poems to her husband that completely ignored the injunction of Puritan ministers not to place one's spouse too high in one's affections. If ever two were one, she wrote, then surely we. If ever man were loved by wife, then we. There were always youngsters who resisted the pressures of parents, kin, and neighbors to marry for practical reasons rather than love. But most accepted or even welcomed the interference of parents and others in arranging their marriages. A common saying in early modern Europe was, "He who marries for love has good nights and bad days." Nowadays, a bitter wife or a husband might ask, "Whatever possessed me to think I loved you enough to marry you?" Until recently, he or she was more likely to have asked, "Whatever possessed me to marry you just because I loved you?" Through most of the past, individuals hoped to find love or at least tranquil affection in marriage, but now nowhere did they have the same recipe for marital happiness that prevails in most contemporary Western countries. Today, there's a general agreement on what it takes for a couple to live happily ever after. First, they must love each other deeply and choose each other unswayed by outside pressure. From then on, each must make the other the top priority in life, putting that relationship above all competing ties. A husband and wife, we believe, owe their highest obligations and deepest loyalties to each other and the children they raise. Parents and in-laws should not be allowed to interfere in the marriage. Married couples should be best friends, sharing their most intimate feelings and secrets. They should express affection openly, but also talk candidly about problems. And of course, they should be sexually faithful to each other. This package of expectations about love, marriage, and sex, however, is extremely rare. When we look at the historical record around the world, the customs of modern North America and Western Europe appear exotic and exceptional. Leo Tolstoy once remarked that all happy families are alike, while every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. But the more I study the history of marriage, the more I think the opposite is true. Most unhappy marriages in history share common patterns, leaving their tear-stained and sometimes blood-stained records across the ages. But each happy, successful marriage seems to be happy in its own way. And for most of human history, successful marriages have not been happy in our way. A woman in ancient China might bring one or more of her sisters to her husband's home as backup wives. Eskimo couples often had co-spousal arrangements in which each partner had sexual relationship with the other's spouse. In Tibet and parts of India, Kashmir, and Nepal, a woman may be married to two or more brothers, all of whom share sexual access to her. In modern America, such practices are the stuff of trash TV. I caught my sister in bed with my husband. My parents brought their lovers into my home. My wife slept with my brother. It broke my heart to share my husband with another woman. In other cultures, individuals often find such practices normal and comforting. The children of Eskimos' co-spouses felt that they shared a special bond, and society viewed them as siblings. Among Tibetan brothers who share the same wife, sexual jealousy was rare. In some cultures, co-wives see each other as allies rather than rivals. In Botswana, women add an interesting wrinkle to the old European saying, a woman's work is never done. There they say, without co-wives, a woman's work is never done. A researcher who worked with the Cheyenne Indians of the United States in the 30s and 40s and 1900s told of a chief who tried to get rid of two of his three wives. All three women defied him, saying that if he sent two of them away, he would have to give away the third as well. Even when society celebrated, love between husband and wife is a pleasant byproduct of marriage. People rarely had a high regard for marital intimacy. Chinese commentators on marriage discouraged a wife from confiding in her husband or telling him about her day. A good wife did not bother her husband with news of her own activities or feelings, but treated him like a guest, no matter how long they had been married. A husband who demonstrated open affection for his wife, even at home, was having a weak character. In the early 18th century, American lovers often said they looked for candor in each other. But they were not talking about the soul-bearing intimacy idealized by modern Americans, and they certainly did not believe that couples should talk frankly about their grievances. Instead, candor meant fairness, kindness, and good temper. People wanted a spouse who did not pry too deeply. The ideal mate, wrote U.S. President John Adams in his diary, was willing to palliate faults and mistakes, to put the best construction upon words and action, and to forgive injuries. Modern marital advice books invariably tell husbands and wives to put each other first, but in many societies, marriage ranks very low in the hierarchy of meaningful relationships. People's strongest loyalties and emotional connections may be reserved for members of their birth family. On the North American plains of the 1930s, a Kiowa woman commented to a researcher that a woman can always get another husband, but she only has one brother. In China, it was said that you have only one family, but you can always get another wife. In Christian texts prior to the 17th century, the word love usually referred to feelings toward God or neighbors rather than toward a spouse. One of the common scriptures we use at Christian weddings is 1 Corinthians 13, talking about the attributes of love. If you take recognition to the fact that those words attributed to this author Paul, we're not talking about affection or love between a man and a woman. We're talking about the disputes between the congregations in Corinth. We're talking about intimate relationships between a man and a woman. We're talking about love between fellow believers. In Confucian philosophy, the two strongest relationships in family life are between father and son, between elder brother and younger brother, not between husband and wife. In 13th century China, the bond between father and son was so much stronger than the bond between husband and wife that legal commentators insisted a couple do nothing if the patriarch of the household raped his son's wife. In one case, although the judge was sure that a woman's rape accusation against her father-in-law was true, he ordered the young man to give up his sentimental desire to grow together with his wife. Loyalty of parents was paramount, and therefore the son to send his wife back to her own father, who could then marry her to someone else. Sons were sometimes ordered beaten for siding with their wives against their fathers. No wonder that for 1,700 years, women in one Chinese province guarded a secret language that they used to commiserate with each other about the griefs of marriage. In many societies of the past, sexual loyalty was not a high priority. The exception of mutual fidelity is a rather recent invention. Numerous cultures have allowed husbands to seek sexual gratification outside of marriage, less frequently, but more often enough to challenge common preconceptions. Wives have also been allowed to do this without threatening marriage. In a study of 109 societies, anthropologists found that only 48 forbade extramarital sex to both husbands and wives. When a woman has sex with someone other than her husband and she does not object, anthropologists have traditionally called it wife loaning. When a man does it, they call it a male privilege. But in some societies, the choice to switch partners rests with women. Among the Dogon of West Africa, young married women publicly pursued extramarital relationships with the encouragement of their mothers. Among the Rukuba of Nigeria, a wife can take a lover at the time of her first marriage. The relationship is so embedded in accepted custom that the lover has the right, later in life, to ask the former mistress to marry her daughter to his son. Among the Eskimos of northern Alaska, as I noted earlier, husbands and wives, with mutual consent, established co-marriages with other couples. Some anthropologists believe co-spousal relationships were a more socially acceptable outlet for sexual attraction than marriage itself. Expressing open jealousy about a sexual relationship involved was considered boorish. Such different notions of marital rights and obligations made divorce and remarriages less emotionally volatile for the Eskimos than it was for modern America. In fact, the Eskimos believed that a remarried personal partner had an obligation to allow the former spouse, as well as any children of that union, the right to fish, hunt, and gather in the new spouse's territory. Several small-scale societies in South America have sexual and marital norms that are especially startling for Europeans and North Americans. In these groups, people believe that any man who has sex with a woman during her pregnancy contributes part of his biological substance to the child. The husband is recognized as the primary father, but the wife's lover or lovers also have paternal responsibilities, including the obligation to share food with the woman and her child in the future. During the 1990s, researchers taking life histories of elderly Bari women of Venezuela found that most had taken lovers during at least one of their pregnancies. Their husbands were usually aware and did not object. When a woman gave birth, she would name all the men she had slept with since learning she was pregnant, and a woman attending the birth would tell each of these men, "You have a child." In Europe and the United States today, such an arrangement would be a surefire recipe for jealousy, bitter breakups, and very mixed up kids. But among the Bari people, this practice was in the best interest of the child. The secondary fathers were expected to provide the child with fish and game, with the result that a child with a secondary father was twice as likely to live to the age of 15 as a brother or sister without such a father. Few other societies have incorporated extramarital relationships so successfully into marriage and child rearing. But all these examples of differing marital and sexual norms make it difficult to claim there is some universal model for success or happiness in a marriage. The point of all this is to express how customs and cultures view marriage differently, approach relationships differently. There's no right or wrong. Just because you were born in this society and just because your culture tries to demand a certain way for you to celebrate your love with someone or for you to conduct your relationship with someone does not mean that culture is right. The whole purpose of this is to get you balanced in your thinking so that you can enjoy this day that you're setting aside to make a public declaration of your love for each other. Because this marriage was not created with a piece of paper. Your marriage is not created by some words you're going to say to each other today, or that is said in front of you today. Your marriage is not created by a pronouncement by some man or woman standing before you saying, by the power vested in me, by the state of and are of God, that does not create your marriage. Your marriage is not created by the signing of a document and filing it with the state of your residence or the state you're getting married in. It is formed elsewhere. And more than likely, you will fall into the category of society's norms of where you were born and raised, your cultural norms. And that's fine. It doesn't require a special dress. There's no obligation to even have rings on your hand or to exchange rings. There is no obligation to even share vows with each other. There is no obligation for 99% of the things you do and plan for on your wedding day. There's no obligation for an expensive white wedding gown or a tuxedo. There's no obligation for you to be presented down the aisle in front of your guests and be given away. There's no obligation for cakes or dances or toast. Those are all recent traditions. And it is all fine. But if you feel pressured and stressed in getting to this point, what is the purpose? What's to be gained? Because you're going to be working in that marriage the rest of your life. It didn't start with your wedding day. I certainly hope it doesn't end with your wedding day. Relax. Take a breath. Enjoy your day. There's no legal requirements for 99% of things that you're planning for that day. There are cultural expectations, is all there are. But you can be you. Your wedding, your way. I'm Dr. Kelsey Graham, 888-501-6689. I do premarital couples counseling. I do counseling for couples who have been married or already into a relationship for years. Secular or religious, doesn't matter. My goal is to wake people up and take the stress out of their marriage. It's not about a dress. It's not about a picture. It's not about your mother. It's not about your father, your aunt, your uncle. Don't allow pressure to take away from your enjoyment of just another day of your life. Because the reality is, the date of that wedding is not legitimately the date that you fell in love and married each other. That is a fact. Congratulations on your love for each other. Stop stressing. It's not that important.